Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. Again, this is Ben Zong with the California Fuel Cell Partnership. I handle all of the digital communications with the Fuel Cell Partnership. Today, you'll have Joe Gagliano. He's our Infrastructure Development Manager, and he'll be presenting as well. A couple of administrative items before we get started. Everyone is muted. However, you can ask questions. There will be a Q&A session after the presentation is over. You will have to use the GoToWebinar tool to ask those questions. Also, we will have the recording and the presentation available next week on our website, and I'll talk a little more about where that will be posted at the end of the presentation. And so with that, I'm going to hand it off to Joe.
Thank you, Ben. Welcome, everybody. As Ben mentioned, I'm Joe Gagliano, the Infrastructure Development Manager with the California Fuel Cell Partnership. And let's get right into it, Ben. Let's move on to the next slide and kind of give an overview of where we are with stations and vehicles. The stations that have been funded in the state of California are tracked by the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, otherwise known as GoBiz. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you see the hydrogen station project stacked bar chart that you can find on the GoBiz website. Right now, we have a number of stations open. 31 stations are currently open, and open retail stations. That's throughout the state, all the way from the San Diego area to LA Orange County, Central Valley, Bay Area, Sacramento, and all the way up to trucking in the Lake Tahoe area. And as you can see, we've got over 60 stations that are currently funded in the state in various stages of development. And with respect to vehicles, we have now a total of 3,800 fuel cell vehicles that are operating on California roadways right now. And as I mentioned, those are supported by 31 stations. The chart in the lower right-hand corner gives you a sense of the cumulative retail hydrogen stations that we have open in the state. You see the progress we've made over the past 3 years in 2015, 2016, and 17 to just over 30 stations. We anticipate current tracking, and our anticipation is that we project about another 8 or 9 stations to open up this year. So that'll bring us up to around 40 stations by the end of 2018. And then current estimates with the other stations that are in development, we'll see that by the end of 2019, we'll see over 60 stations, 60 retail stations open throughout the state. Next slide, please. And here you have, these are our station maps that are available on our website, available free of charge. You can download it, click the link. It gives you an overview of where the stations are, where the open stations are. You see those in the green dots on these maps, the Northern and Southern California maps. And then you see the yellow dots indicate stations that are in development. And it also includes some information as to stations that are off the charts here a little bit, where you see Lake Tahoe and Santanella, and also in the San Diego area. Next slide, please. And that's in addition to our interactive California station map that Ben will show you later on in the presentation. Next slide.
Joe, we're getting questions about audio. Can you hold on 1 second?
Yes.
So I have this is Chris, the communications director. I have a few comments that you can't hear the phone. If you can't hear what's going on, could you please push the hand raise on your next to your attendee? I want to make sure folks can hear. Oh, that's because I was way far away from the microphone, but now I'm really close to it. But it sounds like folks can at least hear then. All right, thank you. Keep going, Joe.
Okay. Are you having any trouble hearing me, or is it okay?
They're telling me that they can hear you.
Okay. All right. Very good. All right. So as I mentioned, we've got a number of stations that are projected to open this year, and this slide shows you 8 stations that we're tracking right now through GoBiz. Early on in the part of the year, we're looking at Ontario and Woodside and Mountain View and LAX opening up. and then shortly thereafter, we're looking at Thousand Oaks, and then towards later in the year, Palo Alto. We've also, as part of the stations that are being open retail throughout the state, we have an upgrade that's going on in Emeryville later this year. And also Burbank is going to be upgraded as well to a full retail station. And the pictures you see here are all of the stations that, the retail stations that opened this past year. Next slide, please. So the original Energy Commission GFO 15605 it awarded a number of stations last year. And in November of 2017, they announced several more stations that were added to that list that they were going to fund. Those included 4 locations, Beverly Hills, Studio City, Redwood City, and Mission Hills. All 4 of those stations are First Element stations. These stations were approved this past January at the CEC business meeting, so they're now in the progress of planning and permitting. And these 4 stations are added to the mix and are projected to open in late 2019. Next slide, please. So the partnership, many of us at the partnership get questions and phone calls from people. When are the next stations opening? Where are they going to be opening? And as part of this process, I have up here to represent this discussion, the automakers' priority location recommendations that was published and can be found on our website. As part of the usual process in determining where the next stations are going to be located, the first part of the process is that the automakers get together and through a blind process administered by the Fuel Cell Partnership staff, they go through these exercises where they do their own internal analyses. Those analyses and lists and priorities are then given blindly to the partnership. We go through this process of then aggregating them and then go through a process of ranking them together. And so the list you see here before you is a list of about 45 market locations that have been identified by the automakers representing their customers, where they see these general market areas where they would like to see retail stations be developed. Now, this is part of the collaborative process that goes on for several months. So the next stage of this, which took place last year in spring of last year, was that these recommendations are then discussed with state officials, ARB and CEC, and then this informs the ARB as part of their AB8 process in the middle of the year, where they do their own analysis using chip model and other inputs to come up with their recommendations relative to where retail stations should be placed in the market in California. Now, you need to keep in mind, and a lot of people will notice that this list and what comes out of the ARB are, while they're analogous, it's not a one-to-one correlation. And part of the reason that is because the recommendations put forth by the automakers are essentially coverage recommendations. Their customers would like to see stations in these general market areas. When the ARB then does their own analysis, they're also not only looking at coverage, but they're looking at a large factor in their recommendations is also capacity. So they look at the market, they look at where stations are now, where there are gaps in the market, and then they go through analysis, and based on the station capacity and the capacities of the network of stations in a certain geographic area, they will then determine their recommendations to give forth to the CEC, and then CEC goes through their solicitation process. So I just wanted to walk people through that process, because often there's kind of a disconnect or there's questions about what's going on here. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So also what happened in January of this year, in order to further the development and speed up the development of stations throughout the state to meet air quality and greenhouse gas emission goals, Governor Brown issued an executive order that requires now 5 million ZEVs on California roads by 2030. And by ZEVs, we're talking battery electric vehicles and fuel cell electric vehicles. So in part of that executive order now is accelerating, is developing our next goal to build out the market, which is now 200 fueling stations by 2025. And this executive order also addresses battery electric charging stations as well. So there are other elements that are associated with this executive order, including updating the hydrogen station permitting guidebook, the ZEV action plan, and it also calls out specifically expanding or looking at ways to expand ZEV infrastructure through the low carbon fuel standard program. Now, associated with this executive order, the state is allocating, or the governor is proposing money to back this effort up. And it would essentially be an extension of the existing AB8 program. And the total monies being proposed for this ZEV infrastructure program would be about $900 million, and it would be an 8-year initiative. Under the current schedule, the $235 million is expected to be expended in the first year, with that should be $95 million a year issued each year over the next 7 years. And again, this pot of funds now is focused on and will fund ZEV infrastructure, which means hydrogen stations as well as EV charging stations. The source of this funding is the same program as the current AB8 program, and also one-time funds from the expiring New Solar Homes Partnership Program. Also, as part of this investment portfolio, we're looking at the governor is proposing $200 million annually through 2025 to provide purchase and lease incentives for purchase and lease of light-duty ZEVs and plug-in hybrids. And the source of those funds would be the cap and trade program. And it's important to understand that we're trying to expand the market. It's really important that support continues through stations, vehicles, and fuels, all elements of customer of adoption and use to ensure initial support of fuel cell electric vehicles turns into lasting sustainable adoption and uptake of the vehicles for a sustained market. Next slide, please. So with that, industry is now looking and has been looking at for some time, where do we go beyond state government funding of stations? The funding in place has done a fantastic job of putting initial infrastructure together. But in order, I think all stakeholders agree that we need to accelerate where we go from here. And the ultimate goal is to minimize government subsidization of the development of infrastructure and allow more market forces to pull the development and expand the infrastructure and the use of vehicles. So to achieve these, now increasingly aggressive hydrogen station goals, 200 stations by 2025, as I mentioned with the executive order, coupled with the partnership's roadmap and Vision 2030 goals of beyond 500 stations, we will require much more than the existing grant funding process in the state. So with that, current industry stakeholders are currently developing additional policy mechanisms to help move that market towards acceleration and sustainability over the long term. And examples of some of the mechanisms that are being discussed and developed as part of this process include modifications to the low carbon fuel standard program, investment tax credits, possible fuel rebate program to allow and achieve pump price parity with gasoline and diesel, and also targeted grant programs that would potentially focus on the less competitive areas of the market that would need stations, such as destination and connector stations. Next slide, please. So every year, there are 2 AB8 reports that come out. As I mentioned earlier, there's the ARB AB8 report that comes out in around the June timeframe, and focuses on vehicle projections based on OEM surveys that they conduct, and then they do their analysis of what the refueling network that is needed throughout the state to support those vehicle projections. At the end of the year, there's a joint AB8 report with ARB and CEC where they look more at costs and usage of stations. And what I wanted to do here is kind of take everyone through some of the highlights. It's by no means is this exhaustive in terms of information that is in this document. I highly recommend people read it. There's a lot of information in there that's sliced and diced in a lot of ways that provides some really interesting and insightful information for people interested in this area. So what we have here, what I wanted to talk about is with regard to station usage. We've gotten questions about in past webinars, what's the average station, what's the average throughput of a station, et cetera. So these two graphs give you a sense of what we're doing in terms of what the network is doing right now in terms of throughput of hydrogen. So on the left-hand chart, you'll see a daily average dispensing or kilograms per day of the entire network and how it's grown over time from the fourth quarter of 2015 through the third quarter of 2017. And you can see that in the third quarter of 2017, we're at about 1,300 kilograms of hydrogen that's dispensed every day. And you can see from the color charts where the different sections, the overwhelming majority of that is in the greater Los Angeles area with at about 800 kilograms per day of dispensing throughout the region. So on the other chart you see here on the right is a comparison in June 2017, using June 2017 data of the amount of hydrogen sold at high throughput stations, monthly hydrogen sold at various stations. And you can see that the average is about 1,100 kilograms a month. But you'll notice here we've got three high throughput stations: Anaheim, Long Beach, and UC Irvine. And UC Irvine is the highest, as you can see, it's the highest throughput station we have in the network. But this UC Irvine fuels light-duty passenger cars, as well as two 40-foot fuel cell buses. One is the UC Irvine bus, and that runs on campus, as well as one off the currently the sole OCTA hydrogen fuel cell bus as well. So they both fuel at UC Irvine. The Long Beach station, this station serves primarily, almost exclusively, light-duty vehicles. So you're looking at 3,100 kilograms dispensed over a month. That brings us to an average of over 100 kilograms per day for that station. And if you look at this station, the average for the rest of the network is around 1,140 kilograms per month. And you see the Anaheim station doubles that. The Long Beach station is 3 times the average, and then the UC Irvine station is about 4 times that average. So that gives you a sense of how the network, how much fuel is dispensed throughout the network, as well as how some of these stations, what some of these high throughput stations are doing on a daily and a monthly basis. Next slide, please. So the AB8 report also looks at station timelines and how long it takes to develop a station. And that timeline for station development has been coming down, as you see on this left-hand chart. You're looking at several different rounds of funding, PON 9608, PON 12606, and now also PON 13607. So what's missing from this chart is the latest round in terms of 15605 stations that are being built out now. The CEC plans to have that analysis done for this year's report. But as you can see, the timeline for developing a station has dropped to about 24 months on average. Some stations do better than that. So it just depends on, as we've talked about before in previous webinars, there are a lot of factors that go into how long a station takes. Some things, you have the best laid plans of mice and men, and an ideal plan to have it done possibly in 18 months. But as with any construction project, there's always something that pops up. So that would possibly, unfortunately, cause those timeframes to slip. And you can see in these bar charts where we've got these different phases that are identified as part of the development process. You see the green part of the chart is phase 1. That's essentially when the Energy Commission and the station developer sign their agreement. They finalize their agreement, and that phase lasts till permit application filing. Phase 2, the purple area you see, is from that permit application filing to the receipt of their approval to build. Phase 3 is from approval to build to becoming operational. And then phase 4 is moving from operational to open retail. And on the bottom of this slide, you'll see the timeline for the upcoming Energy Commission solicitation. So right now we're in January of 2018. The CEC was taking workshop comments. The CEC held a series of workshops, public workshops, in November and December of last year, where they took input on hydrogen station technical specifications, also looking at different mechanisms for funding, and also for evaluation criteria. So they obtained comments from industry and other stakeholders on that. They're in the process of analyzing and organizing all that information. As you can see coming up right now, the auto manufacturer survey is going to play into this as well. But the ARB every year has an auto manufacturer survey as to what the possible projections are for fuel cell vehicles going forward. And then the grants, CEC is working to develop their grant solicitation, which according to this time frame, we're looking at the July or August time frame for that to be released. And then once that's released, then that will allow station developers to submit their applications for building out the network throughout the state. And the anticipated notice of proposed awards would be currently in January 2019, with the Energy Commission approving them through their business meetings in April of 2019. So that's the current time frame that we're working under right now. Next slide, please. So we also get a lot of questions about station costs, and this is what's addressed in the Energy Commission's report as well. So you see in this figure, and these are cost figures for the budgets for the latest round of funding, the 21 awarded stations under GFO 15605. So if you look at this, you're looking at a 180 kilogram station, 310 kilogram station. We're in the ballpark, and these are all in costs. These include, construction, match funding. This includes, engineering, construction, overhead, project management, and design. The all-in cost for a station, 180 kilogram station, which forms the bulk of the network right now, we're talking just under $2.5 million. A larger station in the network is going to be 310 kilogram station would be around $2.5 million as well. And then you see an even larger station is 360 kilogram station. There's a difference though here. The 180 kilogram station and the 310 kilogram station you see here are, they have single fueling positions. So looking at this chart, you'd say, no, the costs are going in the wrong direction. But the larger station you see here on the right, and these are stations that have been proposed and awarded funding to be built in the state. The 360 kilogram station you see on the right represents two fueling positions. So we have two independent and redundant compressors, storage systems, and dispensers. So the actual cost per fueling position, the cost is actually starting to come down now with stations. So ultimately, we want to get to the point where we are building larger stations. Costs will start coming down as we accelerate this going forward. That will help build large capacity stations where they're needed in the market to help drive customer acceptance and move this beyond early adopters and the fast followers to drive fuel cell vehicles, and the market will hopefully take off from there. Next slide, please. And this is where Ben will talk about the interactive station map and SOSS. So over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Joe. So I did have a couple of customers that contacted me directly asking for me to present on our station map as well as our station operational status system. However, I have talked about this in previous webinars, and so I'm going to be pretty brief. However, if you have any questions after the webinar, feel free to contact me, and I'll explain how you can do that as well. So the first tool is our station map, and this can be found on cafcp.org/station map. You can also access this map by going to cafcp.org and going to the stations menu. This is a location-based tool. What that means is we have a list that will filter or change based on your location. And so, for instance, the customers or the potential customers that had called me asked if there was a way to figure out which stations might show up around their area. This would essentially be how you would, moving the mic. You would move this map based to your location and see the stations that are nearest to you. We also have filters. So we have green dots, which represent stations that are currently open now. These are also open retail stations, meaning any customer can show up at that station and get fuel. And then we have the yellow dots, which are in development stations. And we also show when they're, or what phase they are in. So if they're in planning, construction, or in commissioning. And then the last two, we have our proposed stations. Right now, there are no proposed stations, and so you won't see anything there. And then the last category is our other stations. These are non-retail stations that are only available for certain drivers, particularly fleet drivers. So again, this is our station map. Our second tool that I wanted to show is our downloads page.
Before you move on, Ben, because we have a question about this, could you go back to the retail stations and show how people can see how much renewable content is at a station?
Yes. So you can
pick anyone.
You can click on the details of any station, and that will give you more information, and that will also give you the renewable content. Thanks, Rich. The second tool is our download section or our resources section here. We have, again, on this downloads page, you can download the list of hydrogen stations that was on that map, as well as the maps that Joe talked about earlier in his presentation. We also have our blog. This is where, after the presentation is over and the webinar is recorded, once we have the recordings completed next week, we will post it in the blog section here, as well as on this download section here as well. So the last tool is our station operational status system, or commonly referred to as SOSS. This is a system that lets you know when a station is online or offline. So the green dots there, that represents, first of all, we have H70 and H35, and the green dots represents the status of online, meaning if you show up there, you'll be able to get fuel. A red square is an offline status. And then a yellow triangle is for limited. So that means that if you show up there, you will not get a full fill. And that is 95% or lower. We also have this unknown status. And what that indicates is that a station has lost, or we've lost communication with that status or that station. So these stations, they transmit data to us in every 15 minutes. Some transmit it in real time. If we don't receive data in 30 minutes, we then see this question mark. And so similar to the other tool, the station map tool, if you click on the stations, they'll give you more information on for that station, such as when that data last came in. Also, we work very closely with the station developers so that if the station is expected to go offline for an extended period of time, such as the Santa Monica station, they will typically tell us when that station is expected to come back online, and we will add that note to the system. This system also feeds into the applications that the automakers have that feeds into their dashboards. And then again, at the bottom here, we have our non-retail stations.
Ben, can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. So, excuse me. The Toyota Mirai, they had their Intune app, which receives data from the station operational status system. And so you can look, or you can use the Intune app either on your phone or directly on the dashboard as you're driving to see where the closest vehicle or closest station is, and then get also the real-time status on there as well. The Honda Clarity also has a similar system, and we're expecting the Hyundai vehicle to also have a similar system as well.
So Ben, before you move on, because I need you to show this, we're getting lots of questions about SOSS and about other things, and we'll get all of those at the end. But can you quickly show how you sign up to get text alerts?
Sure.
Keeping in mind that this could drive you crazy in the middle of the night. Heads up on that, Eric.
So at the bottom here, you can sign up for notification. So if you already have an account, you just click on login, and you can log into your account. There's a couple things you can do if you have an account. Again, the first thing is the notifications, either via text message or by email. You can also sort the list based on your preference. And then I just also wanted to highlight that we do have the different icons and the different shapes, because we are aware that because of ADA compliance, we want to make sure that you know exactly which status it's currently in. And so again, I wanted to highlight that we do listen to you as customers. My contact is at the bottom of this page here. We're constantly looking for feedback from customers as well as stakeholders. The California Fuel Cell Partnership has a team that works on this project, and so we do get feedback from stakeholders that way. But typically, we're always looking for feedback from customers. And I have a short survey that I would like to hold really quickly for the customers that are on the call here today. All of these stations on SOSS are open 24 hours, with the exception of 3 stations, Saratoga, South Pasadena, and Woodland Hills. In the past, I've heard from customers that you want to have this presented a different way, possibly. So currently, we have the option of just showing it as is, which is, again, when the station's closed at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night, it changes to a red square. A couple of options that we're proposing is, the first is to change that red square to an empty box. And so it would still have a similar feel of not being available, similar to that red square, but it would be, again, an empty gray square. Option 3 is we can add the open hours directly to the homepage of SOSS. And then option 4 is to do a combination of both, so having the gray squares and having the open hours. And so at this time, I'm going to activate a poll, and if you could please respond to that poll.
Yes, wait, everybody who's texting me right now. Okay.
And then go ahead and launch.
And hit okay to launch. This is the first time we've done the poll. Okay. So if you all we're particularly interested in the folks that are driving the cars, because we know that Ben and his team have worked really carefully to make SOSS quick to read at a glance, and we want to make sure that if you are glancing at this, that it makes the most sense to you. So we appreciate that from particularly the folks that are driving. Oh, and right now it's a race between 3 and 4, y'all. They're almost evenly tied.
So again, we'll give it until 12:40, and then we'll move along. But I just wanted to highlight again that if you have any other feedback, this is the type of information that we're looking for from customers as well as stakeholders. And my contact information is at the bottom of the SOSS homepage. We're also looking for feedback on our other tools as well as our other content on our website. So if there's any information that you are looking for in particular about hydrogen stations or vehicles and it's not on our website, please also let me know that as well.
And we do know that people want price on there, and we're working on that. Ben's been working on that. It's a kind of a technical thing, but we're working on that. Okay, I'm closing the poll.
So again, thank you all for participating on the poll. And if you have any other feedback, feel free to contact me directly. All right, Joe, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Thank you, Ben. Just want to remind everyone and talk a little bit about hydrogen production. Like electricity, hydrogen production in California is on a renewable pathway. Currently, California requires 33% of the hydrogen fuel used to fuel cars. It needs to be renewable. Currently, our Hollywood and Playa del Rey stations use 100% renewable hydrogen, and also the Riverside location has an electrolyzer on site, so it produces hydrogen from splitting water right on site. And we do have some other stations, some other electrolyzer stations that will be coming online in the future. Even though, you know, the bulk of hydrogen right now, as everyone knows, is derived from reforming natural gas. And while that is still significantly, has a significantly less greenhouse gas carbon footprint, we're still looking to improve that with renewable, developing and expanding renewable hydrogen production in the years going forward. So, and as part of that, that kind of future hydrogen economy, a renewable hydrogen roadmap is currently in development, and hopefully will be released sometime this year. Next slide, please. So we talked about California, but there are a number of stations, a network of stations that are being built right now also in the Northeast through a partnership between Air Liquide and Toyota. And currently, the Hartford and Providence stations have gone through commissioning and are currently being stress tested. There's the Mansfield, Massachusetts location has completed construction and is undergoing commissioning right now. The Hempstead, New York station, which is on Long Island, a little east of Manhattan and New York City, that has also completed construction and is and will be undergoing commissioning soon. As you can see in the lower right-hand corner, we should say the remaining stations are in various phases of planning and permitting. The lower right-hand corner, you can see the map of where the stations will be, and also a list of where the locations are for those 12 stations. And you see they're spread out among a number of states, all the way from New York and New Jersey, all the way up through Connecticut, Rhode Island, and the Boston metro area. Next slide, please. And just wanted to say in conclusion, we now have a current network of 31 retail hydrogen stations all throughout California. As I mentioned, all the stations use a minimum of 33% renewable hydrogen. As we mentioned, Playa del Rey and Hollywood and Riverside have a higher renewable content in the fuel that they dispense. We have over 3,800 light-duty fuel cell vehicles on the roadway, with more coming every month. A very important development, the governor's executive order, identifying a target of 200 hydrogen stations by 2025, and then putting money behind that of $900 million over 8 years is a significant shot in the arm, and also a challenge for the industry. So we are, trust me, all the stakeholders are wrestling with this right now and starting to develop plans for how to meet those goals. And hydrogen station usage, as we saw in the CEC information, usage is increasing. The development timeframes are decreasing, and also, as you see, as we get the larger stations and larger stations with multiple fueling positions, you'll see the costs are coming down on a per fueling position basis, and that also allows government dollars to go further with these larger stations. And in the Northeast, we've got 4 retail stations that are currently in commissioning and hopefully will come online shortly. And then once those come online, we will start to see introduction of fuel cell vehicles into the Northeast market. So stay tuned for that. And the partnership members and stakeholders are currently developing a Vision 2030 roadmap to identify pathways and targets for accelerating the current market in California beyond 500 retail stations. And also stakeholders are working on potential policy mechanisms to help move us away from government grants of developing stations to that market pull of incentivizing larger stations and bringing down costs so we can develop and accelerate that market beyond the early adopters and help to develop a sustainable and growing market going forward. And with that, that concludes my comments, and we'll open it up for questions.
Okay, first, I'm going to share with everybody the results of the poll. See how that shows up on the screen. Oh, I guess you have to see it in the little box. It looks like the combo was a slim winner over the hours only. So I imagine that's what we're going to see implemented. So a few questions I want to tackle all at once, because whenever we start talking about station locations, I get lots of questions that say, what about this place or that place? These are all still just suggestions of where future hydrogen stations should go. As they get closer to having a new grant funding opportunity, the station developers will use input from the automakers, from customers, from their own sources, and combine that a lot with where stations physically can go. They can't physically go in every location, whether it's space or zoning or a concern from the city about more traffic. So there are quite a few things that go into that. And that's true with whether we're looking at a station might go as a pipeline station or reactivate something that's using on-site electrolysis. It really depends on what exists in that location. So certainly all of your feedback that you give us on these webinars about where you would like to see station goes is really important, and it's very helpful as station developers start looking at locations where they are proposing. And you'll see when we do the Q&A at the end, the document that we type up that has everybody's questions and answers, you'll see much more detail about how things get on the list or why things are not necessarily on the list. So that kind of like knocks off like half the questions that are on here. The other question always comes up about what we can do to speed up construction of stations. And every cycle, every next set of stations that goes in, Joe showed you the chart that shows how the station development time gets smaller and smaller. And I say this every time too, anybody who's done a construction project at your home, remodeling, working at your business, knows that the actual construction is the short part. The long part is getting your permit through the city or getting inspection. And that process through the work of the Fuel Cell Partnership and its members continues to get shorter. And we are always looking at other ways to expedite or speed up the entire process from announcement to opening date. We've seen it go from up to 4 years, now down to something that is more along the lines of other development projects, but we hope to see that even get shorter in the future. So those are a couple of the general questions. Joe, I have two questions that are specific on some clarification. You mentioned buses using the two stations in Southern California. Are they using two different stations or the same station?
Oh, the buses are using the same station. So the OCTA bus and the UC Irvine bus are both fueling up at the UC Irvine station. So OCTA also won awards. They've gotten grant money to expand their fleet to 10 fuel cell buses. So as part of that project or that award, they're also developing a hydrogen station on one of their properties. I believe it's in Santa Ana, to then fuel that growing fleet of fuel cell buses.
Okay, so just for clarification, the Anaheim station is not filling a bus.
That is my understanding.
Okay. Another question for you is with the 4 new stations that were just announced and awarded, does that bring the total under GFO 16605 to 20?
I don't know off the top of my head what the total number for GFO is.
I know, I have the same thing. I think
we've got so many stations now, it's tough to keep track of them in your head. They are included in the totals that I did show in the first couple slides.
Okay. I had one thing. Can you back up to the pictures? One of the very early slides, Bev, that had the pictures of the stations and the list on there. Keep going. It was like way up there. There.
You have to hide the results.
I have to do what? Oh, hide the results. Okay. Sorry about that. All right. Little clarification here. This slide is doing two things at the same time. It's showing you the stations in pictures that opened near the end of 2017 and the stations that are projected to open in 2018. So those are not pictures of stations that are projected to open. So a little confusing that we have two things on the same slide.
I wanted to also touch on something real quickly. Also on our website, our station map does list Ontario, or does say it's going to be open in 2017. However, we're going to update that today to correct that.
Okay. One of the things you may notice on here too is we opened a lot of stations in 2017, and there are going to be fewer stations opening in 2018, and then we're going to see another big wave in 2019. And we kind of expected that. Part of it too, answering some questions about what we can add to SOSS. We were so busy in 2017 just getting all of these stations talking to SOSS and getting them online. We didn't have a whole lot of time to be doing new features or interface development, and so we hope to have more time to do that too. SOSS was originally invented when we had one and only one station, and so it grows as we see how everybody is using SOSS, and it grows as we have new lessons from customers, just like everything else. So Joe, question for you about bringing the Orange County Sanitation District station back online. Is that a possibility?
What I can tell you is I know that there have been discussions among stakeholders to do just that. I do not know the status of those discussions.
Okay, I've heard discussions about that too. That was, for those of you who don't know, we're happy to give you more information about it. It was an experiment by the Department of Energy done a few years back to take wastewater from the sewage treatment plant and turn it into fuel. It was pretty cool. But it was a short experiment, kind of science fair, to see if it was going to work. And Joe, can you talk about the price of hydrogen? We have a lot of questions about the price of hydrogen.
Yeah, currently my understanding, the network average is somewhere between $15 and $16 a kilogram. And being an average in some markets, it's going to be higher than that, and some markets lower. But that's generally the range that we're seeing at the pump.
And there are a lot of factors.
That's right. Yeah, and we do expect that to go down over time as we get bigger stations. You know, we'll start to see more, taking advantage of economies of scale and supply chain economies as well. So efficiencies.
So Joe, you mentioned the Hollywood and Playa del Rey stations are 100% renewable. How are they making their hydrogen?
That's a great question. And I believe they're getting the hydrogen from Air Products, and I'm not sure exactly what the source is for that. We'd have to double check on that.
Okay.
But there was those two stations were during that solicitation, there was a special carve out, a special section on 100% renewable stations, and those two stations won that award in that category. So they had a specific, they appear to have a specific hydrogen production source for those two stations through Air Products.
I'm reading through this list. Joe, can you talk about the Cal State LA station?
Cal State LA station. It took many years to build that, and during that time, codes and standards changed. So the station was started to be built under one set of codes and standards scenario. Life moved on. As the station was built, they were trying to adjust to new codes and standards. So the CalSTLA station they've done a lot of work there. They've done a lot of upgrades. Their goal is to be full retail. They are right now working with industry and government stakeholders to identify what needs to be done to bring it to full retail, and then they will, once they map out a plan, they'll have to look at funding for getting to, or meeting that plan to bring it to full retail. But we're still being worked on with stakeholders, and there's there's interest among customers, there's interest among industry and government stakeholders to have that station go to full retail. So it's just taking a little bit of time.
Okay, an easy question. Define SOSS. It stands for the Station Operational Status System. And if we knew, when Ben invented it all those years ago, if we knew how it was going to be used, we would have changed the name a long time ago. But yeah, someday we're going to bring you all a poll and ask you for a new name for SOSS, because that's a bad one. Sorry, still scrolling through things. You know, we have a lot of questions about the cost of hydrogen and how we arrive at it, and what different stations are charging, how they can charge. It's a lot to cover in a webinar. You're going to see this answered in the Q&A, or you can even see it in one of our previous ones. There's a lot that goes into that. But I will tell you that just like any other retail product, the person who sells that product sets the price for it. It is not something that is a controlled commodity. The couple questions that came through about the rebates and the HOV stickers. Governor Brown did sign an extension on the HOV stickers, which is real name is called the Clean Air Vehicle Decal. So he did extend that. He signed it into order in October. It does now have a new cap on it, so that if you are making over certain income caps, you are eligible for either the rebate or the Clean Air Vehicle sticker. It was something that surprised all of us. We didn't know it was coming, and we are talking about it. But the thing you need to know is it won't slow down your rebate process, and the HOV stickers are still available and will be available. And when we send this around, I'll give you what details that we knew about it. Other questions about how the stations are funded. Right now, all of our stations in California have been funded through the California Energy Commission, and we'll include more details exactly how that funding works, but it is a competitive grant process. And the stations in the Northeast, Joe, how are those being funded?
They are being privately funded. My understanding is that there's no, again, my understanding, you have to defer, I would defer to Air Liquide on this, but they're privately funded station, and I don't think there's government funding associated with those. But that's my understanding. Air Liquide would know better. Okay, and I'm wondering, Ben, if you could please go back to our station map for a moment. We have some questions asking how you know when exactly those new stations are going to open. And if you click on the download station list, there at the side, it's a yellow box. It's a little hard to see. And it is a spreadsheet that gets updated every time that we know an update. So it lists for you as much as we know about where stations are in the process. So you'll notice that some of those in the light blue, those are the ones that are part of that chart Joe showed early on that says early 2018. As we start knowing better, which means they have final inspections lined up, they've gone through a commissioning process, we update the chart then. But we don't want to give anybody an idea that it's going to open on, April 12th, and then for whatever reason it misses that date. And quite often missing that date has to do with inspections and getting final certificates of occupancy and passing tests that make sure it dispenses fuel correctly.
We every day get a phone call from somebody who says, this station looks like it's done. It's just sitting there. Can I use it yet? And it's almost always waiting for final inspection. So that's where you see that. We update it, like I said, usually every Friday, but sometimes there isn't anything to update, but usually every Friday we update it. And we had quite a few other questions about adding different things to the SOSS interface when you look at the station. We are trying to keep that really quick and easy to look at a glance and not overwhelm it. It is a mobile website, so we don't want to suck up people's data plans by showing them a lot of information. That's why you see things like the renewable content on the website, but not on the SOSS interface. Trying to keep that really, really slimmed down as much as possible. All right, I do not see anything else. I see some questions, more questions about renewable hydrogen, and if we're working on a certification process like an organic fruit and vegetable process, and that is something that we've been talking about. And other than that, I think that, oh, I'm sorry, Jed, the last question on here was more about the governor's executive order. And the clarification is that 200 more stations or 200 stations total?
It would be 200 stations total. So it would be 100 stations on top of the current goal.
Okay, and the process for that, by the way, is it has to be signed into law. All the planning is moving forward as though it will be signed into law, but it still needs to go through the legislature. And once it's been signed into law, we'll have a lot more clarity too about how to move forward, what the exactly where we go from here. But we are planning as though it's going to be signed into law. So I see quite a few questions too that are specific to SOSS and asking programming details. At the bottom of the mobile website, that's the m.cafcp.org, that's important. You'll see Ben's contact information, and you can contact Ben directly with technical questions. He's gonna love that. Make sure you contact him like 2 o'clock this morning. He'll really love that. All right, seeing no more questions, a final reminder that we will be posting all of the answers to all of the questions. I answer a lot of questions as we're going because they're very specific. And we'll be posting the Q&A along with the recording of the audio and the presentation that you can download and read and share with your friends and post around on Facebook and really promote the California Fuel Cell Partnership. So thank you all very much for your time.